Hello, I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm head of Blue Stack Productions, the publisher of Irish Environment, an online magazine covering environmental matters on the island of Ireland. I'm very happy today to be here in Belfast with Jim Kitchen from Sustainable Northern Ireland. Jim, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Bob.
Jim, you're the Executive Director of Sustainable Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. And before that, you were Director of the World Wildlife Fund in Northern Ireland?
I was from about 1990 until 2007. I established WWF in Northern Ireland, built it up, and when political devolution came to Northern Ireland, we had the opportunity to expand and do a bit more work on policy and strategy. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, it had been a case of trying to recruit volunteers for fundraising purposes. So put those two things together up until 2007.
And then you became a member of the director of the Sustainable Development Commission in Northern Ireland, correct?
That's right. Again, it was a newly established organisation here, had been established since about 2000 in Great Britain, with an office in Scotland, one in Wales, and there hadn't been one in Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. So it was extended to Northern Ireland, and the Sustainable Development Commission was essentially, the phrase that was always used was a critical friend of government. Mm-hmm. So housed within government, mm-hmm. and trying to advise and be an advocate for good sustainability practice with central government departments. So I was housed in the office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, mm-hmm. which had strategic responsibility for the policy of sustainable development. But nevertheless, it was something which all departments of government were obliged to do, mm-hmm. under legislation dating from 2006. Mm-hmm. And my job was to, as I say, provide advice and be a bit of a nuisance, try and be the thorn in the flesh mm-hmm. that would be removed when they had satisfactorily introduced sustainable policies.
Instead, the thorn got removed quicker than that. Is that right? Fair to say, Jim?
The thorn was removed by
what was that?
by the UK government when there was a change of government back in 2011, and the coalition, the Conservative Lib Dem coalition, decided that it no longer required the services of the Sustainable Development Commission. Mm-hmm. It was the greenest government ever, you might recall, Bob.
Yes.
That was the claim. And so the commission was disbanded. And unhappily, the executive in Northern Ireland also saw fit to dispatch with our services. So that was the end of a period. I think it has been regrettable in the sense that the foot has come off the pedal mm-hmm. Of trying to drive sustainability, both in the UK and certainly in Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. I think there has been a loss of impetus. The implementation plan on sustainable development for central government departments came to an end in 2014, and there is no successor. Mm-hmm. It is the claim that the next programme for government, whenever we have elections in 2016, that the next programme for government will be a de facto sustainable development plan as well, but I'm not holding my breath on that, I'm afraid.
And in fact, the Sustainable Development Commission at its moment functioned a little bit, at least in terms of its closeness to the centre of government operation, like the Climate Change Commission in the UK, but never quite here. Yeah. And that's gone.
Absolutely the case. Yeah. It was a body of government. Right. And that gives you access to decision makers in a way that's not possible for most NGOs. Yeah. So, that's, to be that trusted friend is an important responsibility in a sense, because you might be able to say more critical words behind closed doors without necessarily coming out and being overtly critical in public. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good working relationship. Mm-hmm. Certainly there were a number of senior civil servants who did, in my view, take the responsibility that they were handed very seriously, and were doing very good work in trying to move their departments in the right direction. Mm-hmm. It wasn't universal, but some did it very well.
Now, how did you get from the disbandment of the Sustainable Development Commission to Sustainable Northern Ireland?
Sustainable Northern Ireland has been in existence for quite a long time. It came into being in 1997, mm-hmm. and that actually involved me in a roundabout way right at the beginning. If you recall, one of the elements coming out of the Rio conference way back in 1992 was something called Local Agenda 21. Mm-hmm. Now, when I was at WWF, we observed that there wasn't any real response to the Local Agenda 21 initiative in Northern Ireland. So with the help of WWF as an international organisation, we found some money to kick-start the initiative here. and that was the establishment of the Sustainable Northern Ireland organisation. So come full circle in a way. So it's always been a small organisation working with councils here to try and stimulate that response. In common with government departments, local government in Northern Ireland is actually specified in the 2006 legislation, imposing a sustainable development duty on both of those bodies, and those are the only two named bodies in the legislation. So councils here have always been active on trying to do well some good work on sustainable development, and then the 2006 legislation imposed that statutory duty, which hasn't gone away. It's still there, and Sustainable Northern Ireland provides a level of expert advice and expertise, and again advocacy to try and make that work with councils. That's what we're doing now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at the 2006 statute, which embodied the obligation, and the language is quite interesting. It says a public authority must, which is, that's good, it must do this, in exercising its functions, act in a way it considers best, calculated to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. So it means you must do what you think is best. How are they doing?
I think, and perhaps I would say this, wouldn't I? I think that councils are doing a good deal better than central government departments now. Last year we produced a little promotional video showing some of the achievements of councils around Northern Ireland in terms of the sustainability agenda, and I think there's much that they can be proud of. When OFM DFM,
that's the Office of First
the Office of the First Minister, when at the end of the period of the statutory duty, they had a formal reporting process, and each of the then 26 councils had to write a report saying what they were doing and submit that to OFM DFM, Office of the First Minister, Deputy First Minister. And in doing that reporting, that office then produced a composite report showing what had been done in terms of the legislation, in terms of the statutory duty. Now, it's clear to me from looking at that report that there are more than twice as many examples from councils, from local authorities, as there are from government departments of good practice. And I think that fairly represents where the effort has been put in.
Now, and Jim, am I fair to say this, so you don't have to say it directly, a lot of that's your responsibility, that the local councils are more productive?
Well, I mean, I like to think that, again, the role of advocate does help. I think if you've got somebody, I mean, the problem for councils is that of the 26 councils, and remember that we've gone from 26 to 11 in the past 3 weeks, but in the 26 councils, many of them are very small organisations and didn't have the resource to have a dedicated sustainable development officer. Now, some of the big councils, Belfast, for example, North Down, have always had dedicated officers, but many of the others had officers who were possibly responsible for environmental health, for possibly energy conservation or biodiversity, and they were then asked to take on the mantle of sustainability officers as well in order to meet the statutory duty. And they didn't have the level of expertise that might be required. That's where Sustainable Northern Ireland can come into play, to help with specific advice, to provide examples of good practice, to share intelligence, to be a trusted friend in trying to advance the sustainability agenda. That's what I've been doing for the last 25 years.
What, if any, impact you see in that obligation and the activities for sustainable development with the transition from 26 to 11 councils, and with the fact that that transition also includes fairly heavy additional responsibility for planning and economic development? How do you see that happening?
Well, I mean, it remains to be seen how the planning will pan out. In fact, just right now, I'm doing a piece of work that is trying to again be a document saying you've got some terrific assets, built and natural environmental assets within your new council structure. Let's not waste these by doing bad planning. We're trying to again show examples of good practice in the 11 district council areas, and to show what can be done with good effective planning. Now that in turn leads into something which is also a new responsibility called community planning, and the new legislation bringing these councils into being, the Local Government Act of 2014, links community planning with the idea of well-being. And the well-being is framed in environmental well-being, social well-being, and economic well-being. In other words, sustainable development. So, if anything, the 2006 legislation is refreshed and strengthened on local councils by the 2014 Act. And I'll be working as closely as I can with colleagues in the 11 councils to make sure that community planning properly reflects the ambitions of sustainable development.
In the South, we saw a disaster with local planning, and with the control in local plannings, and all the corruption and just bad planning. Are there built-in mechanisms to see that doesn't happen here, either through training, through oversight? Is there any national government oversight of those local planning?
Well, yes, there will be, and the DOE will retain the responsibility to, I think the phrase in the legislation is to call in planning decisions which they think to be wrong. Councillors have had extensive, these are the actual elected members who are sitting on the committees that will make the ultimate planning decisions. They've all had the opportunity to do extensive training through DOE Planning Service, and that's been taking place over the last 9 months. Now, those guys are going to be sitting down for the first time during April and making their first planning decisions. Now, the planning officers who used to work for DOE Planning, they're now the same people working as professional planning officers for the councils. So they're still providing that level of expertise that they've always provided. The difference is that the final decisions are now with elected members in a way that is closer to the ground, if you like, than it was before. And, you know, in terms of the overall democracy, I think that's a good thing. Now, you know, corruption and all its ills, you know, may be a danger, but there is a code of conduct that councillors have been, again, I think it's been laid on with a big stick saying, here are the consequences if you transgress. So, you know, as we sit here now, Bob, I remain optimistic rather than pessimistic about what will happen.
Now, Jim, let's move on to a different area, because I know something you're very actively involved with, and that is the Food Network. And I wonder if you could tell the audience what it is and what it does.
Well, this is something that we're doing in collaboration with Belfast City Council. The opportunity arose in 2013, 12-13, to compete for one of 6 places across the UK. 3 organisations in the UK that are concerned with sustainable food put open a competition to have 6 cities as founder members of the Sustainable Food City Network. And I, through Sustainable Northern Ireland, applied on behalf of Belfast to be one of those 6 cities. Now, there were about 30 entries, and we were successful in getting a place, along with another 4 cities in England and Cardiff in Wales. So we've become part of that network, and we're just 1 year into it with the backing, financial and logistical support of Belfast City Council. We're trying to move this city in the direction of a sustainable food network. Now, it covers everything that you would expect. It covers the environmental aspects. It covers health. The links between health and food are legion. It covers economy, trying to stimulate small food businesses at the local level rather than trying to rely on big food, agri-food, which is well established in Northern Ireland, but most of that goes for export. That business is not what we're after. We're after trying to encourage small, local, fresh, seasonal, and where possible, organic food businesses. So that's the realm of the Belfast Food Network. I think what we're looking for, and what Belfast Food Network is trying to encourage, is a much more local level, a trusted level of food, so that you know when you go to a genuinely local food supplier, like a butcher, for example, that what you're getting is traceable. And you know, Northern Ireland has always had that traceability in its food system, but you can't do that when you're looking at anonymous processed food that has come through 4 or 5 countries. If you go to a local butcher, he can tell you where his meat came from, when it was slaughtered, and it's all tagged and traceable. You know, that's the sort of food system that we're trying to stimulate, not just for meat, but for all aspects of the food chain.
Okay, now Jim, maybe we could finish up with another important project which you're involved with, and that is the UK climate change risk assessment
Yeah.
report. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
We're just at the very early stages of embarking on the second climate change risk assessment. One was done back in 2011, 2012, of that sort of period.
Mm-hmm.
And that then led to the development of a national climate change adaptation plan, and importantly, from our perspective, devolved versions of that adaptation plan. Now, I can't say that the one for Northern Ireland is the greatest thing that's ever been written. A lot of it is aspirational, a lot of it is vague, generalised, and a bit short on actual action.
Yes.
I think the hope is that this time around, those risks, now, this climate change risk assessment isn't being done as comprehensively as the first one was. The resource isn't just there. The Climate Change Committee is in charge of the whole process, and we're just putting in the local devolved flavour where we can. But it's essentially a literature review rather than, ground-based research. There are 2 or 3 elements of fresh research, but most of it is literature review over the past 5 years.
Okay.
Anyway, this climate change risk assessment, when it's finished, will lead once again to a new national adaptation plan up to 2020, beyond 2020, and the same for the regional devolved sessions. So the DOE will take this risk assessment when it's published, and it'll be up to them to lead on putting a new adaptation plan together. But having said that, of course, the DOE is going to disappear.
Tell us about that. The implications of the reorganization, not of the councils, but of the department agencies. Yeah.
Hard to know as we stand. But the DOE, as it stands now, is likely to be absorbed into the Department of Agriculture in 2016, after the next set of executive elections. So it will be the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, similar to its counterpart in Whitehall, which is DEFRA, the Department of Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs. The difference is that here, agriculture takes precedence over environment. That's of concern to some people, including myself, that the environmental policy, which is designed by DOE, is going to be subservient to the policy for agriculture. Agriculture is the dominant industry in Northern Ireland, as you well know. Unfortunately, it's also responsible for very high levels of environmental pollution and climate change.
About a third of the greenhouse gas emissions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, the existing department, has been working on minimising its climate emissions, but we've yet to see the results of that. And while I think there are many examples of individual good practice, as a whole the industry is still pretty poor, and it's the highest single sector of emissions, climate change emissions in Northern Ireland. So there's a lot of work to do there.
Now let's go back to one thing that I want to follow up on the climate change risk assessment. That is this whole issue that you and I talked about before a little bit, and the kind of the implications of Northern Ireland being a devolved governmental structure and how that works it plays out with climate change.
The problem there of devolution is that we're 3% of the population of the UK, and so there is a shrugging of the shoulders, and although we're supposed to be signed up to the UK Climate Change Act, the reality is that not much happens if we don't meet our obligations. The UK as a whole will have obligations to meet, both to the EU and to itself under its own climate change commitments. But because we're such a small part, there isn't the same impetus, and there appears to be no penalty if we don't meet our proportionate obligation. Now, to be fair to, there's one part of the system which is doing pretty well, and that's renewables. We are ahead of the curve on introducing renewable technologies into Northern Ireland, and that's down to DETI's self-imposed targets for 2020. So pretty good there.
Jim, at least you've now only working with 11 councils instead of 26. So I'm hoping that eases your burden, and we appreciate your talking with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.